Good morning, everybody. How we doing?
Good morning. Well, thank you. How about you, Charles?
Well, so far, so good.
Good.
It's Friday. We made it.
Yay!
Yet another week. Wow. They seem to be rolling by, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Let everybody kind of get on here. So we're gonna have a little discussion today, and I'm going to show some samples of this thing called perspective. And the reason that I'm going to kind of focus on perspective today is we just, what was it, Monday, we talked about a gentleman by the name of Giotto, right? Guy from the beginning of the Renaissance. And one might, go so far to say that it was Giotto and the, I guess you could say, discovery of or development of perspective that really began to change the world and how people saw it, how artists perceived it, drew it, things like that. So perspective is pretty important. And if you work as a visual artist or a photographer, any kind of creative type person in the visual arts, you got to be somewhat aware of it and know how to use it. And so I want to kind of go over, the ideas, the concepts behind perspective, and maybe have you guys, try some perspective drawings while you're at home, either interior or exterior, and, begin to get a sense of, the form, and the depth. So I'm going to begin to share the screen.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. All right, and there we go, right offhand. All right, very first thing you see is it's an exterior drawing, right? And then next to it, interior drawing. And what you have there is you have two, what you would generally consider perspective drawings. The one on the left is, for all intents and purposes, what we call a one-point perspective. And I'll go in depth and I'll try to explain what that is, a little bit more. But if you notice, all of the lines seem to be converging, right? And they all seem to be converging to like a single point, kind of right about there, right?
Right.
And that's what makes it a one-point perspective, because everything sort of, goes to that single point. When you look at the drawing to the right, it's similar, right? You have a lot of converging lines, okay? But somehow it doesn't feel quite mechanical as the one on the left does it. And in fact, some of these lines are not particularly straight. They begin to curve or bow just a little bit. And, so it's really kind of getting into that 2-point perspective idea, okay? I think I just did a bad thing. I think I opened up something that let's get rid of that. There we go. So let's first of all just talk about 1 point, okay? Because there's actually 1 point, 2 point, and 3-point perspective, and we're going to look at all of those. And so here's a basic concept. If you want to take a screenshot of that, it might be worthwhile to do that, just to get the basic idea. All right, so that a 1-point perspective, everything is converging to one single point on what we call the horizon line, or, and here's something to remember, the horizon line is always your eye level. They are, in fact, always the same thing, right? So you can call it the horizon line, you can call it your eye level, doesn't matter. This is where your eyes are, right here at this height. And so while you're looking at these objects, you can see that one object is clearly above your eye level. And because of that, you can begin to see the bottom of that box and two sides of it, right? You can also see that one is below your eye level, right? So you can see the top and the side as well as the front, okay? And then at your eye level, you really only see the two sides. You see the front of it and one of the side panels. All right, so that's 1-point perspective. Now, you know, if you would have stacked these all in a straight line right in front of you, you would have seen 3, you know, fronts. The one in the middle, you wouldn't see any of the side. You wouldn't see any of the bottom or the top. You would basically just see a square if it's at your eye level. When it went above, you would see the front and the bottom, and below, you would see the front and the top. Again, you know, because it's where it is in relationship to you, right? So keep that in mind. And 1-point perspective is probably the simplest form of perspective that you can use. And it seems to be, you know, one of those standard basic tools that, you know, just about everybody, you know, does use. And it can, in fact, really improve your drawing, you know, just to keep those ideas in mind. Such as, let's say you're doing a landscape, all right? And you've got a road and it's going off in the distance. You've got these telephone poles. And again, you know, what's happening? You know, they're diminishing. They're all going back to that one single point on the horizon line, right? So that's a 1-point perspective. Then you get into the 2-point perspective. And let's see. There is a simple concept of a 2-point perspective. Now, again, you know, it's our friends back again. They're the 3 boxes. And again, you have one above, one below, and one at your eye level. Your eye level, again, being the horizon line, right here. Okay. And you can clearly see that each one of these boxes, they go off to 2 different vanishing points, right?
Right.
All right. So where this might be applied is either if you're in the interior of a room, right? The room you're sitting in right now. More or less, you know, when you begin to see the lines up toward the ceiling or the floor, things like that, you know, they could either be a 1-point or 2-point perspective, depending on where you are in the room, you know, and exactly the direction you're looking. If you're outside, you might, you know, begin to see objects kind of like this, right? You know, buildings, houses, fences, you know, things like that. And again, these are all going off to 2 separate vanishing points right there on the horizon line, okay? Same thing with the building. See, the roof is running off to this vanishing point to the right. This side is running off to the vanishing point on the left. And so you get 2 separate points. There's a more simplified house, you know, with doors and windows. And notice that, you know, they all, you know, because it's on that side of the object, all those doors and windows, things like that, they'll all go off to the same vanishing point as that side of the building. Okay. Here's something a little more abstract. These are just shapes or forms. But again, you know, it's an example of two-point perspective. And again, all of these objects are going off to, you know, two separate points. You know, everything over here, these sides, are all going off to this one vanishing point over here. You know, any of the ends, like this side of the box, right there, they're all going off along with everything over here to this vanishing point. Okay? Does that seem to make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Okay, you're following so far.
Yep.
So there's a pretty simple rendering of an interior, okay? And can anybody tell me, what do you think this is? 1 point or 2 point perspective?
Two.
1.
2.
2 wins.
Got the doorways.
Mm-hmm. So why would, was that Elon?
Yeah.
Okay, why would you think it's a 1 point perspective, Elon?
I don't know. I didn't wake up yet.
You didn't wake up?
The floor.
I don't know. I see the doors now. No, I didn't.
Yeah, well, okay, so like the bottom of this wall, the floor, you know, all this stuff seems to be running back to 1 point somewhere back over there, right?
Yeah.
But then what happens with this wall and like the front of the desk and this wall right here, or this wall right here, see? It's all running back to another vanishing point, right?
Right.
So that makes it a 2 point perspective, okay?
Charles.
Yes.
Fran, if you see a corner, would that be a 2 point perspective? If you see a corner, I see a corner.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah. Yeah, like if you're standing in front of a corner of like 2 hallways coming together and you're looking at that corner, you're seeing a 2 point perspective because everything's going off on one hallway to a vanishing point, say on your right, the other one's going off to the left. And I used to give a tour of Benson, and it was a perspective tour so that people could actually physically see, you know, what's happening. Now, a lot of what happens in perspective, and particularly as we move from 2 point into 3 point perspective, has to do with what's going on, not necessarily in the center of your vision, but out toward the peripheral of your vision. And when we get into 3 point perspective, we're going to be talking about that a little bit. Here's another, you know, fairly simple example. Now this is an exterior. And again, this is a 2 point perspective, right? So you can see that, you know, all the sides of the building here, you know, all of these sides are all going off to, you know, pretty much to the same perspective point. The same with, you know, this side of the building, again, going off to the perspective point on the left. Everything over here, you know, on the right side of these objects are going off to the vanishing point on the right, okay? Now that's kind of a rough, crude architectural sketch, but, you know, it conveys the idea of things being in perspective, right? So what happens when, you know, you begin to get things that aren't just sitting flat on a surface, but are both, it's an object that's both above and below your eye level, such as, you know, the exterior of a building or architecture, right? Or possibly a set of stairs.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. all of a sudden, it gets a little more complicated, doesn't it?
A lot more.
Right. See, because things are, moving upward, or downward. And so you're going to need more than just two sets of perspective lines to really get an idea as to, where those objects are kind of vanishing to. And this is still treated pretty much so as a two-point perspective. But you get into this thing that we refer to as three-point perspective. And all of a sudden, let me blow that up. You're in deep water, aren't you? Okay. Because objects begin to take on the appearance of being a little bit distorted, right?
Leave that on till I grab my phone.
Now, these are just simple boxes again. And in this case, all of those boxes are below our eye level, right? Our eye level being up here. All right, that's the horizon line, okay? This is pretty much so where we're standing right here.
Okay.
And we're looking down, and these could be tables, pedestals, all kinds of things. But all of a sudden, just regular two-point perspective isn't really going to be able to express what's really going on, because the top of this column is much closer to me than, say, the bottom, right? And so if I made them the same width, right, it would look a little awkward, okay? Because in fact, what happens, as things get further away from us is they tend to, even though they're actually the same size, they tend to diminish, right? Now, you can see that, while you're walking through your living room, if you're looking down at a table or a chair or something like that, and you're fairly close to it, you're getting this forced kind of three-point perspective view. And, it's more common than most of you would actually think, right? But once you begin to understand, three-point perspective, then you can begin to tackle objects like this. So basically, if you really think about it, it's a big rectangle, but it's in perspective. And, you could turn it into a rectilinear form and then break it up, break up the arch, get the right angles to it. Here's another example, architectural detail. And again, you could draw this just as a two-point perspective, but it wouldn't really look right. If this part of the building were as wide as, say, the bottom here, there would be something a little odd about it. But you begin to narrow that because, again, even though this is the same size as this in reality, because it's further away, it begins to look smaller, right? That would be virtually impossible to do without some sense of three-point perspective, with all the angles, arches, things like that. Or this, okay? And so you can see three-point perspective,
Wow.
and particularly if you're doing like architecture, things like that, becomes really, really important, all right? And for the most part, most visual artists who draw or paint still lifes, portraits, flowers, things like that, perspective isn't as critical, okay? But if you get outside and you start painting things with buildings or any kind of man-made object or anything else, all of a sudden perspective becomes very important, okay? There's a drawing of one of the Venice Canals. And again, notice how this building, see, it feels like it's kind of leaning, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Again, because as it's moving up, what's it doing? It's diminishing, it's getting smaller, right? And again, that has to do with your field of vision. You know, most of this out here kind of happens in your peripheral vision, and your brain sort of compensates for it and tells you it's okay, that the building's really not falling over. But in reality, that's kind of what it's doing, you know, in your eye and in your brain.
You tried to straighten that up. What would happen visually?
Well, if you made everything straight, it wouldn't really feel right. You know, like I said, it would make all of the tops of these buildings feel kind of fat and kind of large and heavy.
Okay.
See? And that's, you know, that's a pretty common mistake amongst, you know, early art students when they start drawing architecture. For whatever reason, you know, when they're doing scenes like this, their buildings and things like that feel really heavy at the top. And that's because they haven't quite gotten that idea of 3-point perspective, and the fact that the top of this building right here is further away from me than the bottom of it, which is closer
What
to
happens if you move your body to the left so that you're off center?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
You know, still the same. You're still going to have the same problem. Now, you may not, if you move to the left, so you're standing more over here, then this is you're going to see less of this. It's going to be much narrower, and you're going to be looking more in this direction. So you're going to really see, you know, more of this building or these buildings along your right side. But you're still going to have to deal with the same thing. If you made all those lines straight up and down, you know, then the tops of those buildings are going to feel like they're, like, you know, really heavy and way too large. Because reality is, we know that as things move away from us, even though it may be the same width, you know, all the way up, they begin to look smaller, right? Now, I wanted to kind of show you, John sent me a sketch, and I'll show you his work a little bit later. But I wanted to show him an example, and he was doing a landscape. He was actually doing a bench in a park with some clouds, and he was asking me mainly about the clouds. But what I noticed is the drawing still felt kind of flat, because it really didn't get the underlying idea of the perspective involved. So this is a real quick, like 5-minute little sketch that I did, and then I sent back to him. And, you know, you can kind of see, you know, your eye level, you know, kind of about here where this guy's head is, right? And then you get the tree line and some trees in the front, you get this bench, and you get a path leading back. And, you know, if, for all intents and purposes, you pretty much so treat this like a pretty simple 1-point perspective problem, right? And so I sent him that, and what I was talking about, though, is the size relationships of the clouds and how they move back toward the horizon line or your eye level, how they're going to get smaller, right? The clouds are going to be bigger at the top of the canvas because they're closer to you. They're more almost over your head, right? And as they move to the horizon line, they're getting further and further away. So they're going to be smaller in size. And here's just some mechanical outlines that I put on it. So again, you can begin to see, you know, where all this stuff kind of goes back to. You you know, including the trees. And so everything kind of, again, you know, the size of these clouds, the size relationships, you know, they're much bigger when they're closer to us. And then as they get further away, they get smaller in scale.
Well,
Same thing.
What's bothering me is, do you think the bench ought to be a little larger? I'm looking at the size of the man walking away from the bench. But the
Well,
bench looks, I mean, sometimes my eyes get fooled. That's what I'm trying to, you know, figure out. Would that have made it enlarge the bench a little bit? Or am I just seeing things?
No, I kind of feel like it's probably in scale with him.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean,
But
it's
I know
not,
what you're saying,
it's
but
not
he,
that close to us. So,
but,
you know,
but he's farther away. It should be less than in scale with, more than in scale with him.
I'm sorry, what?
I know what she's saying though. Because he's farther away, it should be more than in scale with him.
Uh-huh.
If he's farther away, shouldn't the bench be bigger than in scale with him?
Yeah.
No, the bench should be bigger because it's closer, or he should be smaller.
Well,
It's just my eyes are perceiving something that I wanted to know.
Yeah, me too. I
Need
just
to be
want
that
to know.
far away from the bench. He
all right,
doesn't
if you guys,
seem to be
if
that
you
far
guys
away
can
from
make the bench larger, go for it.
No, he doesn't seem to be that far away from the bench. Look how close he is. He's pretty
Okay.
close to the bench. He's not that far.
All right.
Okay.
So, you know, so anyway, like I said, you know, those are some pretty quick little sketches. You know, just again, just to get the idea across it, you know, it's things, even though they're similar objects, you know, as they move away and they get further away from us, you know, they get smaller. Like, for example, this tree and this tree, they're probably about the same size, but this looks smaller. Again, it's further down the path from us, right? So try to be somewhat conscious, you know, when you're drawing or painting, you know, about scale and proportions of things to each other. Let's see, before I get into this guy, you know, here, you know, see, there's one I took a little more time on. Okay.
Right.
Now you notice what's happening with the people.
Yeah. The closest to you, the bigger they are.
What was that?
The one that's closest to you, they're larger and you can't see the full figure.
Right. Yeah.
But
So
as
she's
you go
pretty.
back, it diminishes in size.
Yeah. So she's pretty close to us, right?
Right.
He is not quite as close, and she is definitely further down the path, right? And yet we feel like they're all the same size, right? Because what happens? All of their eye levels are about at our eye level. So that tells us we're all about equally as tall, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so, you know, unless this guy, you know, if I'm 5'7" and my eye level is here, right? That tells me he's probably about 5'7" too. Now, if the top of his head was way up here, he'd be about 6'4" or 6'5". Okay. So he'd be a much bigger guy, you know, much taller. So that could change things, you know, throw you off a little bit in perspective. But for the most part, you know, if people are kind of at scale with you, you know, then you're going to, their eye level is going to be very similar to yours. Okay. Here's another example of that, another sketch I did. And so this is an interior, kind of like a mall or something like that. And again, look, you know, we have this stairway or escalator going up. You know, you've got this opening up to a second floor. You've got the, basically, you know, back to the entrance to the mall, you know, way down back there in the back. So primarily, this is generally a one-point perspective. Okay? And that's what I started with, was just generally a one-point perspective. And then I just kind of built out from there. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, you know, this is a quick, like maybe 5-minute sketch. You know, it wasn't like a long, involved drawing. And then I saw a video of a guy, you know, pushing this kid around in a boat, you know, down at a lake. And again, you know, it was a good opportunity to talk about perspective. You know, look at where the buildings are. Look at the size relationships, say, of the clouds and how they get smaller as they move back to the horizon line, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then we'll get into this discussion about reflections and about optical effects, like if you're looking into a vase of water, you know, with flowers in it or something like that. And there's a, now I didn't do this, and it's something I picked up off the internet, but here you have a still life, right? And what I was saying earlier is even if you're doing fairly, you know, like simple things like just painting still lifes, you still have to think about perspective. Where are those objects in relationship to you, right? Can anybody tell me? Are these?
The shadow looks too big behind the picture to
The what?
me. The shadow.
Well, it depends on where the light is.
Light is.
Yeah,
From
the light was,
the light
yeah, the
looks
light
a
was
little large.
a very low angle, so yeah, it cast a pretty extreme shadow. But now, where are you in relationship to this? Are these objects at your eye level, below your eye
I'm on
level?
the
or
right
above?
side. I'm on the right
Below
side.
the eye.
I'm on the right side, I think.
You're standing up and that's sitting down.
They're below.
Yeah, they're below your eye level.
Below eyes, yeah.
And some objects, yeah, tend to be a little more to the right of us. Some objects tend to be a little more to the left. And then that shoe and that center pot right here tend to be kind of right in front of us, okay? If I had to place myself, you know, in this drawing, I would say that I was somewhere like right along in here, okay?
Okay.
So you see, you know, even doing like smaller, simple objects, you need to consider perspective, right? All right,
Yes.
so everybody ready to have your mind bent a little bit? Okay.
Already bent.
Already bent? Okay, well, we're gonna bend it a little more this morning, okay? Because I'm gonna introduce you to somebody you probably are actually already familiar with his work. His name is M.C. Escher. He was really popular in the 60s.
Yes.
I can't imagine why Escher would be popular in the 60s, right? Maybe the whole thing with psychedelics, you know. But again, 1 point, 2 point, or 3 point perspective. What do you think?
3.
2 point.
3.
Yeah, definitely 3 point perspective. Okay.
I see that one. That one.
Probably more like 16.
Yeah.
Feels like it.
Well, unfortunately, you can't really have more than about 3 points. Okay? That's all you get. You know, 16 point perspective, you would be seeing the fronts and sides and backs of objects. That would be more like what Pablo Picasso was doing in Cubism. Okay. But this is, you know, pretty standard 3 point perspective. Now notice how, you know, the top of the building seems to be closer to us, right?
Right.
And the base of the building seems to be further away. What do you think that is?
Bird's eye view. We're on top looking down.
Right, it is. It's a bird's eye view, but you see he's pushed, you know, he's pushed the scale of the size of these objects because they're closer to us. And then, you know, he's diminished them as they move down and away from us, right? So, you know, just for fun. Now, see, this is a fairly, you know, this is kind of believable, right? You could be up above a building and kind of see this. Right? But then you get into things like this.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
oh my God.
All of a sudden,
Down below, looking up.
well, are you? Which
This is a
way
scene
is
from
up?
Harry-
Which way
this
is down?
This is a scene from Harry Potter.
My eye goes straight to the bottom with the person going up the stairs, and then
Right.
But look on the right. Where's that person?
Uh-huh.
And
So you
where's
see-
where's
Somebody, they're on the wall. They're on the
Yeah.
wall.
So you see, he's kind of messing with your head,
Yeah.
and you really don't know which way is up or down, do you? And in fact, here let's play with this just for a second.
Like
Okay.
an optical illusion.
So what happens if we do this?
Oh yeah.
Ah.
Still, there's your guy. That's the guy in the center right there
Uh-huh.
is walking on the wall.
You got people upside down in the left part.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
crawling up out of the basement. Yeah.
Or something.
Upside down?
So you see,
Crazy.
you know, this kind of works from any direction, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Not work.
Anybody got an aspirin?
So you see, this begins to get into this idea that they started playing with really in about the 1950s, and it's called optical art. Okay.
That's the best angle right there.
Yeah. And then,
Except for the left side.
Blew away hole.
yeah.
Mhm.
So Escher was one of the people who, you know, played with optical art, but he kept it in, you know, in a somewhat representational and realistic, you know, approach, where other artists went really abstract, and they would again play with that, you know, that illusion of space, and they would play with your senses as far as trying to fool your senses as far as what was really, you know, reality. Here's another Escher. And, you know, now he's not pushing perspective questions there, but you see how he transitions and how, you know, you start off with these graphics shapes, and these graphic shapes begin to morph, you know, into like these bird-like shapes and more like birds. And then they take off and they fly and they get further and further away from you, right?
Right.
Okay. So again, you know, he's playing with optical illusions.
oh yes.
And a lot of artists, you know, particularly, like I said, in the 50s and the 60s, had a lot of fun, you know, playing with stuff like that. That was pretty common. But also painters. You know, painters, people like Clifford Stills, and guys like Al Held. You know, there were a lot of like optical artists out played with stuff, and they would literally sort of mess with your mind with these paintings, because you really wouldn't know, you know, which way was up. And like in Clifford Stills, for example, he painted on such a large scale, and he did basically what they call it was field theory painting. And he would fill this canvas with color, and you would walk into this room and it would fill even your peripheral vision to the point to where you would kind of get lost, you know, in that painting, and you would begin to lose all sense of balance, you know, because it's like this painting would literally almost like surround you, and you would be just sort of lost in that space. I went to an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in San Francisco where they have a room dedicated to him, and literally they have handrails and a bench for people to sit down. If you spend more than about 3 to 5 minutes in there, you will, you know, begin to sort of lose where the floor is and you know, where the horizon line is. So that was kind of the whole idea behind that art, was to really kind of put you into the painting and put you almost into a different reality. So again, you know, that was another chapter of art history. It was a little more recent. It's called Optical